Hi, I'm Rod Chappell, and welcome to the Rod Chappell Show. I'm delighted to have you with us today as we have two candidates for Missouri's Cole County Prosecutor's race. We've got three segments today, and so I want to just take a brief moment and allow each of the candidates to introduce themselves. First, we'll start with DK. Thank you for being here. DK, would you care to introduce yourself to the camera?
Well, sure. I'm DK Hirner, and as you said, I'm running for prosecuting attorney. I first lived in Jefferson City in 1979, so I've been around the scenic capital, as we like to call it, for a while. And I became interested in the race of prosecuting attorney because I have had a great chance to work with community action agencies and with Empower Missouri, and I think that we have an opportunity to kind of level the playing field between those who are less fortunate in this society and those who are the haves. I'll just say those who are the haves. And I worked for two governors here in the state, Governors Carnahan and Holden, and I was Deputy Chief of Staff for Governor Holden. I was Chief of Staff for Lieutenant Governor Sheila Simon in the state of Illinois, where I had the privilege of taking an office that had been vacant for 3 years and hiring a staff of 30 people and going from 0 to 30 and having no programs to having programs that had been legislatively assigned to the office in about a month's time between December 1 and Inauguration Day. And I just really think that it is important that the people of Cole County have a prosecutor that is a true public servant and will be open to share information with them and will post anything and everything that they would like to know about the office, which is not disallowed by law.
All right, thank you. Locke Thompson, you're our other guest. Thanks for being here today.
Thanks for having me, Rod.
Would you tell us about yourself?
Sure. Well, I grew up here in Jeff City, graduated from Helias High School, and went on to Mizzou for undergrad and for law school. Really started prosecuting during law school when I had an internship with the Jeff City Prosecutor's Office. I got to work a lot of cases there, did probably 75 to 100 bench trials during my time just as an intern before I'd ever graduated law school. After law school, I went on to work in the Jasper County Prosecutor's Office down in Joplin, Missouri. And in addition to running my own criminal docket down there, I was also responsible from the prosecutor's side running the mental health court docket and the veterans court docket as well. I was very proud of the work we did there using alternative courts in an attempt to really, lower that overpopulation problem we're seeing in prisons and county jails nowadays. From there, I went on to the Attorney General's office, where I worked as a special prosecutor, handling mostly crimes of public corruption, sexually violent predator cases, and crimes against children, also the odd drug distribution case, things like that as well. I'm running because I feel like for too long Cole County's had a complacent prosecutor's office, and I'm ready to get in there and take that experience I've gained around the state, both in Jasper County and then at the AGs, where I was going any which way at any given time, and bringing that experience back to make Cole County a safer place for us all.
Excellent, excellent. And maybe both of you can kind of share in answering this question. What's the job of the Cole County prosecutor? What does that person do?
Who wants to go first?
Yeah.
At the end of the day, a prosecutor's job is to do justice and make sure that justice is being administered fairly across the board. As DK said, not just for the haves or the have-nots. It doesn't matter what your background is. What matters is what you've done and how you should be held accountable for your actions.
Yeah. DK?
And the Cole County Prosecutor's Office is very important, I think, in the protection of women and children of Cole County. Mm-hmm. And so there's a great need to demand justice for women and children when they're assaulted, and that includes being molested or being sexually violated, or just any kind of assault. And so I think that that's very important. But the one thing, Rob, I think that a lot of people aren't aware of is that the Cole County Prosecutor, and this is what really interests me as a public servant, is responsible, has a unique responsibility for investigating and for vigorously going after those who commit public corruption. And that applies not only to state officials or not only to local officials in Cole County, but to statewide officials as well.
Well, those are enlightening answers, and I can't wait to talk more about them. Like I said, we've got 2 more segments if you guys have time. And so let's just thank our guests for being here, and I encourage everybody, if you haven't tuned into the Cole County race, it's just one of many elections that are on the ballot for November the 6th. You have until October the 10th to register in your jurisdiction, wherever you are in the state, so that you can vote, and then it's important to get educated on the issues. So I hope that you share the information you have here. Feel free, share the program with friends, relatives, people in your community who need more information in order to be able to make an informed decision about their vote. Thanks for joining us on The Rod Chappell Show, and we'll be back with you.
They're coming. Places, everybody.
Light check. 1, 2, 1, 2.
Everything looks good on our end.
And lights.
Come alive with the forest. Visit discovertheforest.org to find a forest near you.
The Rape and Abuse Crisis Service. Remember, there is no excuse for domestic violence or sexual assault. Contact us on our confidential hotline, 634-4911 or 800-303-0013, or find us on our website, www.racsjc.org, that's racsjc.org. We are proud to be a United Way partner agency.
Welcome back to the Rod Chappell Show. We're thrilled to be in the second of 3 segments talking about the Cole County Prosecutor's race. As you know, we try to bring legal issues to the people in the community in a way that we can actually grab a hold of them. And so we're thrilled to have D.K. Hirner and Locke Thompson, both candidates for the Cole County Prosecutor's race, with us today. Thanks for coming back.
Thank you.
Happy to be here.
In the first segment, we just talked a little bit about who we were and the roles of the prosecutor's office, and that's good because I think that maybe through these continuing conversations we'll explore some different aspects of that. Tell me, does everybody agree that the role of the prosecutor is to seek justice?
That's correct.
Yes.
All right. The other day I was talking with a judge who had heard a case, and he said literally the prosecutor got up and said, "I'm here to get a conviction." And I think that those are some of the same kinds of ideas that we've had at work here in Cole County that haven't necessarily lent themselves well in the community's viewpoint. As you know, the incumbent, Mark Richardson, is no longer going to be holding that role. And I don't know whether that's something that you care to comment on or whether it's something that there were policies or practices in his office. But how about everybody, if you can, are there 2 or 3 things that you think you would change right away, and what are there?
I think that a mentor of mine once said, always remember when you go into an office, it's evolution and not revolution. So I think it's very important that, let's say during a transition period, and having worked with public officials for many, many years, between an election and when the office holder takes office, there's a transition period. So I think it would be very important to speak with people who are currently employed in the office of prosecutor and ask them what they think has worked well and what hasn't worked so well before you go in and wholesalely change how an office has operated. And again, based on my experience, I don't think it's good and wise to get rid of institutional knowledge. So I think it would be important to learn a little bit about those in the office who have institutional knowledge. Some of them are, let's say, they're career employees at the office, and they're not there because they're partisan. And I think it's extremely important that the office of prosecutor be a nonpartisan office. And so those are the things I would take my time to see what needs to be changed in the office instead of making a wholesale assumption that I know it all.
I hear you. All right. Well, thank you. Thanks. Locke?
Sure. Well, I think one thing I mentioned a lot during my primary against Mark was that I think that Cole County needs to be doing more in the use of treatment courts, diversion programs, alternatives to incarceration, particularly when it comes to individuals suffering from mental illness and addiction issues. You know, it doesn't do any good at the end of the day to put somebody in prison for a simple addiction issue or mental health concern where they're not going to get the treatment they need and get out and be 3 times more likely to go back to committing an offense. We want to try to break that cycle and help people get out of that cycle of repeat offending if possible. So that's something I really want to address as soon as I get in there. Another thing, as DK mentioned, you know, you have a transition period, and getting through that adequately is of the utmost importance. I know for a fact there's already been some transition over there. A few attorneys have chosen to move on. So I think that's where it's incredibly important. You have a prosecutor in there who can go into court, pick up a docket, and know exactly what they're doing, because that's going to be the reality of it for at least a little while. Often the elected prosecutor of a county won't necessarily take a docket. They'll take the occasional case, but they're in a more administrative role. Here, I don't think we're going to have that luxury, at least for the first 6 months to a year. I'll be taking a docket, getting in there, and doing what I need to do. So I think those are the big things I would try to change. I would also like to see us move more toward preliminary hearings as opposed to simply taking everything through a grand jury. I don't think that taking things to the grand jury is always the most efficient use of county taxpayer dollars, and it seems like it gets overused here to me. You don't see it that often in other counties.
DK, I'm going to come back to you and ask you about cash bail to explain that to the public so that they understand what that is and the implications of it. Locke, can you tell us more about this grand jury? There are probably people that are watching the show right now who've heard the term but really don't know what it means or why it's not so effective.
So with a grand jury, what you have is basically the prosecutor gets to call in the grand jury, present whatever evidence he wants to present to them, and the grand jury makes the determination on whether or not there's going to be an indictment. And there's a joke that goes around in the legal community that a grand jury would indict a ham sandwich. I mean, a lot of indictments come down from grand juries. Not often do you see where they refuse a case. Whereas when you have a preliminary hearing in front of a judge, that judge makes a determination as to whether or not the felony has likely been committed and whether or not the individual charged is the one who likely committed that felony. And from there it goes on to the circuit court level. And where you see a problem with grand juries particularly sometimes is that you don't necessarily have to have your witnesses there for a grand jury proceeding. Whereas with a preliminary hearing, the rules of evidence apply, and you have to bring in your witnesses, you have to have your officers there to testify, this and that. So in a lot of criminal cases, you end up having issues with witnesses not wanting to come in, not wanting to deal with it anymore. And so with a preliminary hearing, it kind of allows the judge to hold both sides' feet to the fire a little bit and say, you know, we're going to set this for prelim. Prosecution, got to have your witnesses here. Otherwise, case is going to have to be dismissed. And that's important because you don't have that barrier with the grand jury proceedings. So you get to the circuit court level, and oftentimes, prosecutors still never met with the witness prior to trial because they can't get a hold of them. So with a preliminary hearing, it forces you to have that interaction with the witness, to get tabs on them, know where they are so that they're not, you know, running off, disappearing, anything like that. And it also allows you, in case they do such a thing, you have their testimony under oath, and if you can show that they're unavailable, you can still use that testimony.
Sounds like the preliminary hearing still allows the prosecutor, or may even require the prosecutor to do the work to build a case before determining that there'll be one.
Absolutely, that's part of the job.
Yeah. Anything you'd like to add about that perspective on the preliminary hearing?
Well, I think it's very important when we think about a prosecutor is that prosecutor has prosecutorial discretion. And that person, that prosecutor, is going to make the decision as to who does and who doesn't get charged with a crime. And so I think it's important to have some life experiences and maturity to bring to that decision, because we know that when those types of decisions are made, that impacts somebody's life. It impacts their ability to work. It impacts their ability to pay the rent, to support their family. And so when we talk about justice, those are the kinds of things I think about when I think about justice, is the impact on the person writ large.
Right. I think that's important. In too many cases we've seen, and these are examples, and not examples of every prosecutor, but examples that certainly have come out of the Cole County Prosecutor's Office where it just didn't seem like that was what was happening. So that's refreshing. I'm glad that we've got that. Tell me, what cash bail, what is it? Why is it a big deal?
Well, if a person is charged with a crime and does end up going to jail, that person can be released. That person can be released by posting bail. And so let's say Paul Manafort, who is a multimillionaire. That gentleman would not have any problem posting bail, would he?
No.
No. But let's take a person who is a poor person, who is living hand to mouth. Okay? That person has difficulty in posting bail. And even if you're doing a cash bail system where you have a bail bondsman, that person has to come up with a percentage of that amount of money. And while it may not seem like a lot to you or to Locke or to Paul Manafort, $200 is a lot of money to some people. And you know, if your bail is $20,000, you have to come up with $200. And so, you know, by having a total cash bail system, you are doing nothing, in my opinion, but discriminating between the rich and the poor.
Locke, what do you think?
Yeah, and I think Cole County's actually started to take some really progressive steps when it comes to addressing cash bonds. You know, they've just started the pretrial release program here in Cole County, which the courts basically look at an individual, look at their risk of reoffending, and determine whether or not they're going to go ahead and release that individual on their own recognizance. I am in favor of things like pretrial release, particularly when it comes to lower level, non-dangerous offenses. I've said it before. I know that when I worked in Jasper County, technically driving while revoked was an arrestable offense. And I get why it is technically, because the officer can't continue to let someone commit a crime by driving away.
Right.
But when people were having to bond out on something as simple or ridiculous as a driving while revoked or suspended, all it does is you know, that person's probably losing their job if they've got one, spending the next 5-6 days in jail before they can plead with the judge to get out, ROR, on their own recognizance. And it just clogs up, you know, the jail system as a whole when there are dangerous individuals who need to be incarcerated. Now, when it comes to dangerous offenses, talking your murders, your sexual assault, your rape, things like that, I am not in favor of removing cash bonds on those types of cases, certainly, because at that point it just becomes a public safety issue.
Right.
But generally speaking, yes, for lower level offenses, I like what I see Cole County doing with regard to trying to ease those folks out so that we don't have the overpopulation issue, and so that these folks aren't losing their jobs. If you're talking about fines or restitution, that means they might be able to pay that instead of, you know, just going to prison eventually because they can't pay.
Right. So. Well, and thank you. And we're getting ready to move into our third segment just this quick. But cash bail? Is that something, do you agree with Locke on that, or would you go further? What do you think?
I've seen different systems. So as far as posting cash bail or letting a person go on their own recognizance, I've looked at that pretrial release program and agree with Locke that we should move toward that type of program.
Okay.
The other thing is a number of communities have looked at alternatives to a bail bondsman or that particular type of system that provides bail to certain individuals. And so I think it would behoove us to look at other examples across the country where people have, prosecutors have set up alternatives within their counties to having individual bail bondsmen, and that way you don't have to post money up front, and it kind of levels that playing field.
That sounds like it might be a show in itself. Well, thanks. As we get ready for our third segment, we'll have some more issues about mass incarceration, the death penalty, about the role of a prosecutor, and I'll ask them squarely, will they do what's been done here in the past? This is Rod Chappell with The Rod Chappell Show. Thanks for joining us, and we look forward to seeing you again.
The mission of the Special Learning Center is to provide comprehensive early intervention services to children with special needs so they may attain their maximum potential. You can find our website at www.speciallearningcenter.com for current activities, and we're also on Facebook under the Special Learning Center. We try to be a resource for people with disabilities in our community. If you have questions or a need, call us at 634-3070.
This is the moment I knew. His future had no boundaries.
There are some moments only the forest can inspire. Find yours at discovertheforest.org.
Hi, and thanks for joining us again on the Rod Chappell Show. This is the third and final segment that we have about the Cole County Prosecutor's race. It's one of the most important elections that is taking place in Cole County. Many people would argue that there is no person in a county more important or just as relevant, more powerful than the prosecutor in the county. So today we've got the two candidates for here in Cole County, D.K. Hirner and Locke Thompson. Thank you both again.
Thank you.
Now, I tell you honestly, sitting here, I know that I could probably spend another 4 hours asking you a bunch of questions, but you have both been excellent about going out into the public and talking about the issues, taking questions from the floor, having questions that have already been predetermined, and I just want to commend you both.
Thank you.
Thank you.
For too many times, in St. Louis County and even here in Cole County with the last prosecutor, there was a reluctance of those folks to participate with the public and their constituents. I think that as an elected official, but more importantly as professionals, you guys are taking that seriously at this stage of the race, and so that's awesome. Now, I promised you some hard questions, okay?
Okay.
All right. And so I'll give you about, how about 2 minutes each. Your thoughts on the death penalty, and are you going to use it here in Cole County? Who wants to start?
I guess I can.
All right.
Certainly the death penalty is a pretty controversial topic, and I know that when you look at it historically, it has been something that's been administered quite possibly unequally when you look at minorities in that regard. Now, I know that Cole County currently has a capital case, death penalty case. Right now, it's a murder that occurred actually over at Algoa Prison, or I'm sorry, not Algoa, JCCC. But I would say about the death penalty, it's something that should only ever be used in the most extreme of circumstances. And I would not hesitate to use it if I felt it necessary. It's something that, at the end of the day, again, a prosecutor's role is to do justice. And I've seen some of these cases where you look at what that victim went through and what their final moments were like. Being executed by being forced to jump off a bridge, things like that. And at the end of the day, when you put yourself in that victim's shoes, sometimes there's no true alternative to justice other than to say that that individual needs to pay with their own life. But certainly it's something that needs to be examined as to how it's being, handed down. We have seen issues with that. There's no getting around that.
DK? Thank you.
And, Locke alluded to it, and I'm sure most people know that the death penalty is reserved now across the country for the worst of the worst. And so it is not ever applied or given as the sentence, the death sentence, other than those who have murdered someone. I think that it could be considered, but considered only if the person who killed the other person, murdered the other person, knew exactly what he or she was doing, that they knew that as a result of their action, the consequence was the death of another person. I think it is cruel and unusual punishment if we think of it in terms of people who are mentally disabled and can't make the connection between their action and the effect of their action. I did a paper, I did a class, a death penalty seminar class when I was in law school. And I did my paper on gubernatorial, the governor grants clemency.
Yes.
And so I learned a lot. And one of the things that I learned from one of the governor's staff, who subsequently became a judge, he said, if you make that decision to grant the death penalty, he says, once you've made that decision, he said, you can't back off from it. There's no going back. I've seen a lot of things, the Innocence Projects in other states, in this state. I was particularly familiar with it when I was in the state of Illinois, where people had been sentenced to death, and then through subsequent DNA evidence and subsequent evidence, they found that person was not guilty of the crime that was committed, that they had been unjustly charged. And so I think that all evidence, including DNA evidence, must be taken into consideration and before even considering requesting the death penalty for a person.
Okay. Rod, if I could just briefly go back and touch on something. First, I totally agree with that assessment there, that you're talking about a type of case where the stakes are higher than anything else, and certainly transparency is of the utmost importance when it comes to this. I don't know how I could ever sleep at night if I knew that I had inadvertently gotten someone convicted and sentenced to death who was truly innocent. One other thing, though, is that, yes, a capital case is not your typical murder case, which some people may not really understand. So you've got your second-degree murder, you have first-degree murder. Capital murder goes beyond a first-degree murder. It must be a first-degree murder, but there are other factors, other aggravators is what they call them, that have to be in place in order for the death penalty to even be on the table at a certain point. So I have heard of some prosecutors who have unfortunately still tried to seek the death penalty minus aggravators. That to me is unethical and a clear violation of the prosecutor's duty and responsibility to the public.
Yeah. Thank you. Do we all agree that there's a problem with the over-incarceration of Americans at this point?
Absolutely.
Yes.
Okay. I know that there's been a lot of legislation that's been pushed through this state and many others, even federally, to ensure that prison populations would increase as opposed to decrease. Do you see it within your role as a prosecutor, should you either be elected, to go and testify at the legislature on issues that affect the prosecution of our citizens, issues of justice, or even new areas that they may seek to incarcerate people over?
I would say absolutely. Having worked with legislative bodies for many, many years, most people don't realize the impact that the decisions that are made in a state capitol under a dome, they don't realize the impact that that has on an individual's life, individual's daily life. And so I think, and part of the mass incarceration, part of the numbers going up and up and up and up, where the mandatory sentences, the 3 strikes you're out, the, you know, crimes that were misdemeanors, crimes that were not violent, that they just said, okay, we're going to make it easy.
Right.
We're going to make it easy.
Right.
Well, I don't think it's good to make it easy. And so, you know, you have to go hold the legislators accountable for their actions. And I think one of the things that a prosecutor can do is you get some degree of credence just having been elected, because you're talking to another elected official. And so you bring to the table, to the witness table, to examples of what can and can't happen. And the legislature, believe it or not, does listen to people and will take those examples into consideration. And if you offer to say, I'm going to look at the legislation you're doing and I'm going to comment on this and get it to your staff, they will pay attention and listen. Takes a little effort, but it's worth it.
Absolutely. Locke?
Yeah, I certainly think just being down the street that the Cole County Prosecutor often gets the unenviable task of going to testify in front of congressional hearings, things of that nature, House committees, I guess I should say. But yeah, it's incredibly important. You know, I think, especially being here, seeing some of the high-profile stuff you do in Cole County, it gives us a pretty unique perspective on things, and I think that that's something we need to utilize when it comes to addressing issues with mandatory minimums, things of that nature. Now, I do know that we've recently, in the past, year or two, 2 years, I believe, they've added one more lower class of felony and another lower class of misdemeanor. And maybe part of the answer there is seeing if certain offenses can't get dropped into those lower categories of felony and misdemeanor, so that we're not looking at increased minimums on crimes that really shouldn't be harshly dealt. Not to say harshly, but you know, where someone's not looking at the next 7 to 10 years in prison because they made a mistake or they had an addiction problem. And I know that they have dropped the classification of most drug crimes down. So hopefully that can help alleviate some issues, but there's still a long way to go.
Absolutely, absolutely. And both of you probably heard of conviction integrity units. Is that something that we support? Yes, no? What do you think?
Well, I will admit that I'm not directly knowledgeable about conviction units, but I do believe that you shouldn't overcharge a crime to try to get somebody to plea deal down to a lesser crime.
Yeah.
That is wrong in my book. And I think that if a prosecutor is going to file charges, that prosecutor has to make it known to the police and to others involved exactly what is what evidence, what level of evidence has to be provided before you're going to take it to a court of law. Because you know, if you have to have enough evidence to bring if somebody's going to have committed a crime,
Well, that's the truth.
so that the court will convict the person. But you have to share, you have to not be afraid to get out and get the information to people of saying, you know what, this is what you have to provide me. This is the level of evidence we need, or we're not going forward.
Locke?
I would certainly agree with her point as far as communication with law enforcement is of the utmost importance on cases. Particularly my experience with the Attorney General's office, I didn't have the luxury of just being able to walk down the street to the PD or the Sheriff's office and say, hey, I need to talk to Detective so-and-so. I had cases in Chillicothe, cases in the Boot Heel, cases in Kansas City, cases in Southwest Missouri, where I had to stay in regular, frequent contact with my law enforcement officers. And it's incredible how much easier it is to get a case rolling and moving and push through quickly when you have all your ducks in a row and when your officers are on the same page as you. You know, I had a meth dealer up in Chillicothe, Missouri, and through the work of the detective on the case, he was actually a patrol officer at the time, he's now a detective, but through the work he did and just staying in constant contact with him, the guy who had previously been trying to get a 5-year deal ended up pleading guilty to what amounted to 17. Wow. And he was on his 6th or 7th felony, a dangerous felon, and so we were very happy with that result. Similarly, worked with the DDCC guys, Division of Drug and Crime Control, from the Highway Patrol on a public corruption case in Boonville, and due to the incredible work those guys did, staying in constant contact with them, we were able to get that case resolved within 2 months, which is almost unheard of in criminal justice.
Sure. Let me ask you, so just as basic concepts, as we close out the last segment, and again, thank you both for being here. I really appreciate it. Here in Cole County, we've had cases reversed, or at least the latest one that I'm aware kept from the Court of Appeals, because the prosecutor refused to allow people of color on the jury, tried to get them off because they were of a color. Is that something that you guys are going to do?
To try to get people off because they're people of color?
Yeah.
Absolutely not.
Well, it's wrong. It's just fundamentally wrong on every level.
I agree. Thank you. I appreciate that, and I'm sure that the people, the good citizens that would like to serve on juries, appreciate the opportunity to carry out their civic duty as well. One of the other concerns was that there wasn't a free exchange of information. So if a prosecutor had evidence that some of that didn't come out, maybe till the trial or sometimes even after, is that conduct that both of you would seek to avoid?
Delayed disclosure is a huge problem. You only have to look at the Duke lacrosse case with Mike Nifong to find out how big of an ethical issue that is. And I know that they're readdressing that with one of the, I believe, Supreme Court rules is going to readdress delayed disclosure. And so now discovery will be due at the beginning of a case at arraignment, or at least what you have to that point. And hopefully that resolves some issues. But I'm always in favor of disclosing as much as I can, as quickly as I can. Again, it helps get the case moving, helps get it resolved faster, saves everybody time, saves the taxpayers money.
DK?
And I 100% agree.
That's good.
No surprises.
Welcome changes here in our community. And then the last one, and I think that we'll have to make this really pretty quick, the detention of juveniles who have been engaged in misdemeanors, nonviolent, even low-level drug type issues, or MIP, minors in possession of alcohol. Do you see the detention of those juveniles as being necessary, just in general? I know there's special circumstances, but what do you think?
Generally speaking, I would say probably not. I think there are alternatives to actually incarcerating kids like that, and hopefully something that you can address, and it should be used more of as a last resort in that juvenile justice system, in my opinion.
Absolutely. DK,
and I would agree. Kids are kids, and sometimes they exercise poor judgment.
Yeah.
And you don't punish somebody for poor judgment. You have mentoring programs, you work with like the Boys and Girls Clubs, you work with stakeholders in the community who are willing to work with young people so that they have some good role models, because oftentimes that's a problem, or sometimes they have good role models and they do it anyway. But you know,
everybody gets a chance.
So everybody gets a chance.
Well, I agree, and I think that's fantastic. And speaking of that, you know, recently there's been a move to, at least in the municipal level here in Cole County, get rid of the ability of the people to elect the prosecutor. Do you have a feeling on why it's important for people to be able to select their prosecutor?
Well, at the end of the day, the prosecutor is accountable to the entire county. It's your job to do justice for the victims, for the people of the community. You have a duty to the defendant to make sure you prosecute them fairly and as quickly as possible. And I can't fathom a world, or nor would I want to see a world in which prosecutors are appointed and do not have that level of responsibility, I guess, to the public.
And DK, do you feel similarly, or how do you feel about the idea that the local prosecutor, at least on the municipal level, that the ability of the people to elect that person could be taken away?
I think it should be maintained, and I've followed the stories in the newspaper about how the city council thinks it should appoint the prosecutor. Well, the thing is, the city council, they're elected.
Right.
And they're accountable to the people who put them there.
Yes, they are.
And I think the same holds true for a municipal prosecutor, is that that person is elected by the people and must be accountable to the people who put him or her there, not to his or her bosses.
Wow. I think that Cole County is already in a much better position than it has been for several years. And so not only by your presence here, but by some of the information that you've been able to share with me, but more importantly, the public through this show and also the many debates that I know that you've been in and are continuing to work through. Just let me again commend you for your service and your dedication and your willingness to be public servants. This isn't the easiest time for that. So thank you very much. And listen, if you've got time, we would love to have you on some different day.
Sure.
Love to be here.
All right. All right. Thank you both.
Thank
Thanks,
you.
Rod.
Thanks for joining us on the Rod Chappell Show. We really do strive to bring legal issues to the people that need to know about them. There can be no more important race in Cole County than the prosecutor's race. If you aren't registered to vote, please go and register now. Take 5 people with you. Register people. Make sure that your family and friends, people in your neighborhood, people who go to your church or work with you on the job, that they are not only educated about the issues, you can do that by talking to them about it. Make sure that they go vote. It's part of being a good citizen, just like serving on a jury. I'm Rod Chappell, and thanks for watching.